Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories. Please like and subscribe, and hit that notification icon so you never miss out. Now on with the stories.
It started out as a regular day, just like any other, when I got word from a neighbor that Karen had been on another one of her rants. Living in a rural area, I figured I'd be safe from people like her. But no, Karen had somehow made her way into our community. She bought the large house on the hill overlooking my land a few years back, and ever since then, it was one complaint after another. Too much noise from the tractor, dust kicking up when I plowed the fields, the smell of the cows. You name it, she hated it. The latest gripe, though, really took the cake. She stormed up my gravel driveway one afternoon, red-faced and furious while I was busy checking the irrigation lines. I saw her coming from a mile away, her arms flailing as she shouted, "You can't plant those crops there, it ruins my view." My first instinct was to ignore her. I had a full day of work ahead of me, and the last thing I wanted to deal with was Karen. But there she was, yelling at the top of her lungs, stomping her feet like a toddler. So I stopped what I was doing and walked over, wiping the sweat off my forehead. "Karen, this is my land," I said, trying to stay calm. "I can plant what I want." She wasn't having any of it. "Your land," she scoffed. "Your land is ruining my property value. I paid good money for that view, and now you're going to destroy it with crops? I don't think so." I couldn't help but laugh, which only made her angrier. "It's farmland, Karen. What did you expect? I expected you to be a good neighbor and consider how your actions affect others," she snapped. "You don't own the whole world, you know." I shook my head. "Look, Karen, I'm just trying to make a living here. The crops stay." Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, jabbing a finger into my chest. "If you don't get rid of those crops, I'll make sure you regret it." That's when I realized she wasn't just angry, she was unhinged. I thought about telling her to get lost, but something in her tone made me pause. I didn't think she'd actually do anything, but the way she glared at me with that crazed look in her eyes gave me chills. "What do you mean by that?" I asked cautiously. "You'll see," she said with a smirk before turning on her heel and stomping back toward her house. I should have known that was just the beginning. A few days later, I started hearing whispers from the other neighbors. Karen was going door to door, rallying people against me. She'd convinced a handful of them that my crops were going to destroy the neighborhood. One guy down the road actually came by and asked if I could move my fields a little further away from his house, as if I had hundreds of acres to spare. Then came the threats, notes left in my mailbox, crude signs posted along the fence line. Things like "Farmer, go home," and "We don't want your kind here." It was absurd. I'd been farming this land long before any of them moved in. But Karen didn't care about that. All she cared about was her view. The worst part came one night when I was out late, checking the perimeter after a storm rolled through. I smelled something burning. My heart dropped. I followed the smell to the edge of my field, and there it was, a small fire smoldering near the crops. I rushed over and stomped it out, barely managing to save the plants. Whoever started it had meant business. The next morning I found Karen pacing at the end of her driveway, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. "I hope that fire didn't cause too much damage," he said with a fake smile. "You know anything about that?" I asked, my voice low, trying to keep my anger in check. "Oh, I just thought it was interesting," she said with a shrug. "Things like that happen when people don't take care of their property." I wanted to scream, but instead I called the fire department. I wasn't sure what else to do. The fire marshal came out, took a look, and confirmed that it was arson. But with no proof, they couldn't do much. Karen must have thought she had me cornered because she didn't stop. She kept pushing, kept trying to intimidate me. And I wasn't the only one dealing with her wrath. One of the newer families down the road told me that Karen had been harassing them for letting their kids play too close to her property. Another neighbor had caught her snooping around their yard late at night. She was out of control, and no one seemed to know what to do about her. That's when I got an idea. If she wanted to play dirty, I could play dirty too. I reached out to some folks I knew at the local fire department. They were good people, and they'd been dealing with Karen's nonsense for a while now too. We cooked up a plan, and I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when it all went down. A week later, I was out in the field pretending to plant more crops when Karen came storming up to me again. "This is your last warning," she said, her face flushed with anger. "If you don't stop planting, I'm going to burn the whole thing down." I raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" She hesitated for a split second, but then her bravado returned. "Absolutely." Just then we heard sirens in the distance. Karen's face went pale as the fire trucks came roaring down the road, lights flashing. They pulled up right in front of her house. What's going on?" she stammered, glancing between me and the fire trucks. "Oh, I thought I'd call in a little help," I said with a grin. "You know, just in case you made good on your threats." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. She was speechless for once. The fire chief, a gruff old guy named Hank, got out of the truck and sauntered over. "Afternoon, Karen," he said, tipping his hat. "Heard you've been having some trouble with fire safety lately." I don't know what you're talking about," she stuttered. Hank looked over at me, and I gave him a nod. "Well, we're just here to make sure everything's in order. Can't be too careful with all these crops around. Wouldn't want another fire now, would we?" Karen glared at me, but she didn't say a word. She knew she'd been outplayed. The fire department spent the next hour doing a safety inspection of her property, much to her dismay. By the time they left, she was insane, but she never threatened me with fire again after that. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it, not by a long shot. Karen wasn't the type to give up easily. If anything, my little victory with the fire department just fueled her obsession. She couldn't stand that I'd managed to outsmart her, and she was determined to make my life hell. So she went straight for the jugular and dragged me to court. She claimed I was violating zoning laws, something about how my land wasn't properly classified for farming, which was ridiculous. My family had been farming that land for generations, long before Karen had even set foot in the county. But that didn't stop her. She hired some fancy lawyer from the city who was more than happy to take her money and file endless motions against me. I'll never forget the day I got served those papers. I was sitting on my porch enjoying a rare moment of peace after a long day, when a guy in a suit shows up and hands me an envelope. My heart sank as soon as I opened it. Legal jargon, threats, court dates, it was all there. And the worst part, Karen was standing at the edge of her driveway watching the whole thing with that smug look on her face. I could see her from across the road, arms crossed like she'd already won. I felt sick, not because I thought she could actually win the case. I knew the law was on my side, but because I knew what it meant. Endless court dates, lawyer fees, time wasted. I didn't have the kind of money to throw around on lawsuits like she did. Every dollar I earned went back into the farm, into keeping my operation running. The idea of sinking thousands into a fight with her, just to prove I had the right to do what I'd always done, was infuriating. But what choice did I have? I had to fight it. The first court date was a joke. Karen strutted in like she owned the place, all dolled up in some ridiculous business suit with that city lawyer trailing behind her. She shot me this self-satisfied grin as she sat down at the plaintiff's table. I tried to keep my cool, but I could feel my blood boiling. The judge, an older guy with glasses perched on the tip of his nose, looked over the paperwork with a bored expression. He asked a few questions, mostly directed at Karen's lawyer, who launched into this long-winded speech about property values and zoning regulations. The whole thing was nonsense, and I could tell the judge wasn't impressed, but that didn't stop them from dragging it out for hours. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it out as simply as I could. I had every right to farm the land, and Karen's personal grievances didn't change the fact that my property was properly zoned for agricultural use. I had the records, the deeds, everything in order. The judge seemed to agree with me, but of course Karen's lawyer wasn't done. They asked for more time, more documents, more nonsense. And that's how it went, week after week, court appearance after court appearance. Each time Karen would be there, staring me down, acting like this was her big moment. I tried to ignore her, but it was hard. I'd see her whispering to her lawyer, shooting me those smug looks, like she knew something I didn't. But I knew better. It wasn't about winning for her. It was about making me miserable. She knew the lawsuit wouldn't hold up, but she also knew I'd be stuck paying my lawyer, taking time off work, losing sleep over this nonsense. It was a war of attrition, and she had the money and time to keep it going as long as she wanted. The worst part was the cost. Every month, I'd get a new bill from my lawyer, and it seemed like the numbers kept going up. Thousands of dollars just to keep my land and do what I'd always done. I'd lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep this up. I wasn't going to lose the case, but the financial toll was brutal. Every penny spent on legal fees was a penny I couldn't invest in my crops, in my equipment, in keeping the farm going. Karen, meanwhile, didn't seem to have a care in the world. She'd parade around town telling anyone who'd listen that I was ruining the community and bringing down property values. She even tried to get some of the other neighbors to testify against me in court, though most of them weren't dumb enough to go along with it. Still, her constant presence, her smug attitude, and the way she looked at me like I was dirt under her shoe, it wore me down. Months passed and the case dragged on. I was in and out of court so often it felt like I lived there. Each time the judge would push the case forward a little more, but nothing ever got resolved. Karen's lawyer kept filing motions, delaying the process, drawing it out as long as possible. I'd sit there in the courtroom, my hands clenched into fists under the table, just waiting for it all to end. But it never did. Even after the judge finally ruled in my favor, after months of stress, sleepless nights, and thousands of dollars spent, I didn't feel like I'd won. Sure, the court ruled that I had every right to farm my land, but the legal fees alone were enough to put a dent in my operation. And Karen, she acted like nothing had happened. In her mind, she wasn't wrong. She never admitted defeat, never apologized, never acknowledged the chaos she'd caused. As for Karen, well, she's still up there in that big house on the hill, bitter as ever. I see her every now and then, pacing at the end of her driveway, glaring down at me like I'm the villain in her story. She never learned a thing from the whole ordeal. In her twisted mind, she's still the victim, still convinced that I've wronged her in some way. Sometimes I wonder what goes through her head when she watches me out in the fields tending to my crops. I see her peering over the fence, arms crossed, that scowl permanently etched on her face. It's like she's waiting for the next opportunity to strike, plotting her next move. I've come to accept that there's no reasoning with someone like her. She's not going to change. People like Karen don't see the world the way the rest of us do. In her eyes, she's justified in everything she does. She truly believes that she's fighting some righteous battle, and no amount of logic or reality will ever convince her otherwise. Maybe one day she'll finally go too far and get what's coming to her. I don't wish harm on anyone, but part of me wonders if karma's just waiting for the right moment to catch up with her. Until then, I'll keep my head down, keep planting my crops, and keep living my life. She can't control what I do, no matter how hard she tries. Still, there's a part of me that can't fully relax, not while Karen's still lurking on that hill, watching my every move. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like her don't give up. She may have lost the court case, but she's not done. I know she's plotting, waiting for the right moment to cause more trouble, and I'll be ready when she does.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.